Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I am here today to talk about building trust in the digital age. And in particular, how do you intentionally set a strategy and have all the tactics and the nitty gritty detail about how to build trust? And in particular, I want to talk about this idea of trust scaffolding, because in order to build trust, you need some scaffolding to keep it and support it so that over time you have that space to be able to create that trust. So, one of the things that I'd love you to do as you're coming in today is to share where you're coming from, but also what has been your best strategy for building trust. So I would love to hear from you. Share where you're coming from, and also what your best strategy has been. So let me just go into first of all why this is so important. Why is trust important? It seems like a no-brainer, right? Of course, trust is important. But if it was important, then why are we spending so little time really talking about it, really intentionally and systematically building trust in everything that we do? Because this is something that we need to do for our organizations, but also as leaders. So, one of the reasons, especially if you're trying to create change and transformation, and my favorite word, disruption, then you need to have trust. Because when you're creating change, then you need as much disruption, especially the more disruptive the change, it's not going to happen if you don't have trust. People will not move without it. If they don't trust that you know what you're doing, that you're competent, and that you are looking out for their best interests, why on earth would they change? They're just going to stay exactly where they are, where they know, even if it's not the greatest situation, they know how things work and where they sit. So, in order to create change, you have to have trust and people have trust in you, but also that people have trust in each other. That if they take a step forward, they're not going to get stabbed in the back by somebody standing next to them. Another reason to have trust is that it builds confidence. When you trust, again, in yourself, in the people around you, in your leaders, you gain confidence. And when you gain confidence, then you know that you can take on all the uncertainty and all the adversity that may come your way because you trust yourself and the other people to rise up to meet those occasions. And finally, the third reason to have trust is that you can only move as fast as your trust allows. There's a great book by Stephen Covey called The Speed of Trust, which talks about how do you, again, build trust? What are the activities you can do? Because when you have trust, you can go fast. So I want to say hello to a couple people who are here. Let's see, who do we have here? I'm just going to look at the comments here really quick. So we have Botha. Thanks so much for joining. So Cheer from the Western Sahara. And Professor Silpa, again, thank you so much for joining from India. Vinay's here. Josiana from Lebanon. Renier from Amsterdam, who had to pitch out. I lived in Amsterdam for 2 years, so that's all the Dutch I remember. Glad you could join us, Renier. Gabriela from Brazil, thank you so much for joining. And hello to from Terry, who says, well, you live on Earth. Thank goodness we do live on here. Thank you for joining here today. And Mohammed coming from Jordan, Matthew coming in from College Park, Maryland, and RM Wow, thank you so much for joining. I love the location issues because I have spent the past 10 days driving across the country with my son who graduated from Boston University this spring. I'm very, very happy that my son is graduated. And also my daughter from Berkeley College of Music. So I have 2 college graduates now back at home with me here in San Francisco. But I have seen a tremendous part of the country over the past 10 days. And it's been exciting, and I'm very grateful to be back home. And Stacy, thank you so much for joining also from Colorado, and Yanti from England. So thank you so much for commenting. I love hearing how diverse the group is from various parts of the world. But I also would love you to share just what are some of your best strategies for building trust? How do you build trust as a leader or with your teammates or even with yourself? And also what we're going to talk about today is how do you think about building these levels of trust? Okay. So when I think about trust, I do think about it as a systematic way of doing this, laying a foundation and then building on top of that. It isn't as if you can walk into a room and just say, hey, everybody, I'm here. just trust me, all right? Just trust me that I know what I'm doing and that you should just follow me into battle, into all this disruptive space. Of course, no one's just going to trust you just like that. And if you think about the elements of trust, and there's been a lot of studies around this, they are built on competency, that you know what you're doing, that you can prove either from your past actions or current actions that you know what you're doing and that it works. It's based on communication, and it's also about consistency. And I think the most important one that we sometimes forget about, it's also based on compassion. It's based on that relationship that you can build with people, the compassion, the empathy, that you can see other people for who they are. And this is a key part because it's one thing to be able to do all of that, but there are also some foundational things to do as a leader. And the way I think about this, there are three levels of trust. And the first one is based on rules, that it's rules based trust. Even when you don't know anybody, you know nothing, when you walk into a situation, if there are rules, then you know how everyone's supposed to behave. There are processes and procedures. So I could be a new employee. We could be walking into a new course or a new experience. And the first things that people say is like, here are the rules. These are the ways that we work. Here are the processes. These are the ways that we do things. And we follow the rules because that's how we know, again, that we can trust the next person standing next to us to follow the same rules. And that builds trust, to know that the rules are there and that they're being reinforced. So that's rules-based trust. The next one is based on your knowledge and experience. So I think about it as experience and knowledge-based. And that is, you've seen that other people are playing by the rules. So even when rules don't exist, I know you. I know you're consistent. I know that you've been competent, that you have compassion for things. So I trust you as an individual. I know from my own experience, I've seen with my own eyes, I felt it with my own heart that you are a good person. You're going to keep your word. And even though we don't have rules to help us navigate this space, I know I'm good with you. But then there's another one that is based on knowing. So if one's based on rules, one is based on knowledge and experience, the other one is much more relationship based and somebody who you feel really knows you. So this relationship based trust is when I know you, you know me so well. We've both been open with each other. You know my hopes and my dreams, the places when I've been disappointed and my hopes dashed. I feel like you know me. And in return, I also feel like you know me. I know you. And there is a sharing and also this vulnerability that's happened. I love how Stacy says here, and sorry, wrong one here. Stacy says, showing my own vulnerabilities is key to creating trust with my colleagues. And what Stacy is doing here is that third level of trust, where you're really showing and being open about who you are. And because you're doing that, you're inviting them to also be vulnerable in that way. So I think one of the ways to be thinking about this is how do we do this level playing field of that rules-based, that knowledge experience-based, and that relationship-based levels of trust. Because what I found, especially when you're going through a lot of change, that rules-based trust may not be as strong as you think it is. And unless that foundation is absolutely there, that scaffolding is there, the higher levels of trust have a really hard time actually being created. Okay, so let's take, these are some great comments. I want to share some of them with you all. Let's see, we have Rebecca. This is the one I showed earlier. Time and proof that you have their best interest in mind is how you demonstrate that trust. Again, from that consistently, from a leadership perspective, that you have that compassion, you understand that what people are going through, and they feel, and they very importantly feel like you know it too as well. Professor Silpo says, doing what you say you will do. Again, going back to that consistency. Thank you so much for sharing that, because if you say you're going to do something and then you don't do it, that breaks trust. So that consistency is absolutely important. Let's see what else we have here. We have Matthew who's saying, believe in yourself and what you can do. Professor Silpo with another comment, being approachable and friendly. Absolutely. And Vinay also has this point about time building trust, because this is not something that you can do, again, instantaneously overnight. And Terry has some great best practices. Thank you so much for sharing all this, starting with you trusting your team in particular, transparency in thoughts, plans, and actions, and then gratitude for building and acting through trust, never violating the trust that's been created, and support whole life goals, a journey of the happiness pursuit. I love this because what Terry, what you're saying is to build this, that consistency and get into this place where you feel like you are known, you are seen, and you trust that somebody will see you. And it can take decades to build trust, but seconds to destroy it. So I think again, those are some wise things that you shared there. What I'd like to do for the rest of the time here is to go into a little bit more detail about how you actually build what I call trust scaffolding. And these are the foundational elements. And my feeling is when I walk into an organization, I work with a leader where just trust isn't there. These are the elements that are missing. So all these areas of being vulnerable, listening to people, they can be destroyed if this trust scaffolding is not there. And I'll give you an example. I think one of the biggest problems is that there may be rules, but if there isn't accountability, if they aren't being followed up, then people can see that these rules can be broken willy-nilly. And I'll just give you a single example is a rule might be we have meetings and they begin on time. And if somebody consistently comes in late over and over again, then you're breaking that trust. Well, we agree that we would start at this time, but you consistently don't do this. And I know I realized a couple years ago that I was doing this. I was just running always, packing my schedule full of things. And I was constantly running into meetings late. And like, I'm so sorry I'm late. And then finally somebody very wisely pulled me aside and said, look, you're always apologizing. You're not really sorry because you keep doing this over and over again. You're breaking trust with us. And how can we trust you as a leader if you don't even do the most basic things like show up for meetings on time? So these little things, these little signals make a huge difference because can people really trust you if you can't do even these small, little, simple things? So I think, again, one of the key areas here is how do you create these rules and procedures and make sure that people are abiding by them? For some of you who may know some of my work, I'm a big fan of openness. And the reason why openness is so important is that you share information. You don't keep it locked away. And openness, by its nature, creates transparency and then accountability. When you have openness in the organization, there's no place where anyone, including yourself, where you can hide. And again, I think that is a key part for building that foundation, those rules around openness, how we work, creating that transparency, and then accountability. And so what happens as a result, because these rules are there, they're contracts or processes, they create boundaries about what is acceptable. And it's really, really clearly laid out. In my study of disruptive organizations, the reason I think they fundamentally are able to do things so well is they have this level of rules-based trust so wired in. They have so many rules, so many processes, which is kind of counterintuitive. Because if you think about a disruptive organization, you feel like everyone's just going off to the far edges of the universe, exploring new areas, pushing the boundaries. And they do that because they are able to really clearly set a container and put those boundaries around how we're going to work together, what we're going to work on, and how we're going to actually move forward and make decisions. All of those things are worked out in advance. One thing I saw recently was this idea of having a decision matrix about what are all the key decisions that we're going to have to make for this project to be successful, how we're going to make them, who gets to make them, just being really clear of what the rules are going to be about how we're going to create change and disruption. So having that is extremely important. I just want to share, Jay has this great example of what are the elements of trust. Again, another way of thinking about this: honesty, compassion, and transparency. And that honesty and transparency is what I've been talking about here. Be really transparent and hold yourself accountable and be really honest about what's going on. In my research of leaders, when I ask people, what do you want in your leader? And two things keep coming up over and over again. They want people to be honest and they want people to be fair. You do those two things, they will trust you. And we demonstrate that day in, day out by having these rules that we have defined what the boundaries are, and then reinforcing them and making sure that everybody, including yourself, is being held accountable to those rules. All right. So one of the things that I love around these ideas of openness and accountability is again the idea of process and procedures being reinforced. Because when you reinforce them, it creates a psychological safety for people to come forward and do audacious, daring things that they would normally not feel safe doing. There's a lot of work that's done around how do you create psychological safety. And when you have those rules and you see them being reinforced, when somebody's speaking over you, for example, when you're trying to present an idea, and somebody comes to your defense and is like, oh wait, let you go ahead and say your piece. And you're giving them that space again. And you feel safe and are able to move forward. Even small little things like that, again, about we let people finish what they're saying before we build on them versus we're going to interrupt each other willy-nilly and just challenge each other constantly. So these processes are so important to, again, create that psychological safety. One of the other things I would say the three things are openness and accountability. First of all, having this culture of openness that builds accountability, being really clear about process and procedures and written out, but also in the way that you have meetings, the way you communicate, having those laid out so that people can have that psychological safety. And the third area is a really important one, which is allyship. And what does it mean to be an ally? Meaning, I will speak up on your behalf when you don't have power. And I love this because this is where that third level, highest level of trust of relationship is there. Well, who is going to come to my aid? Who can I trust to be my ally, to be my supporter, to be my champion when I really need them to be that? And the opportunities to, when you find those opportunities to be an ally for somebody, those are the places where deep trust is happening. This could be, again, when somebody comes to you and says, I have a problem. I really don't know how to do this. And you can support them either as a peer, as a leader, even just a friend or a family member. And you build trust because you are there to support them at vulnerable points in their lives. But it's also when you see somebody in a point, when they're struggling, when you come to their aid. And it's even more so when you use your own sense of leadership, of power, of entitlement and privilege on somebody's behalf. Let me give you an example. I had a colleague who, she was Asian American woman, and she was working on with a client. And somebody came up to her and made some sort of derogatory comment about her gender and race. And she kind of just brushed it off. I'm a junior person. I'm new at this. But she mentioned it to her manager. And the manager was so affronted, took it up to the senior partner, who then went and talked to the client and said, that person needs to apologize to my team member. This is unacceptable and we will not tolerate that. Now, that senior partner didn't need to do that. That partner could have just said, well, she's just a junior person. It was probably a one-off thing. But no, made this an issue and went back to the client, risking the client relationship, using all of the power of their position to be able to say, this is not acceptable. Now, imagine if you were that woman and saw this happening, what level of trust happens there? Knowing that somebody was able to come and exercise their power on your behalf, to come and really fight for you. When somebody will step in and see your struggles and anticipates that and goes above and beyond on your behalf, that's where trust is happening. And for us leaders, this happens, these opportunities to be an ally, to be a supporter, to build that trust, to fight for the people we believe in, happens to us every single day, if only we look for it. It takes a word, it takes a small action to build that trust, and you are going to win it and be rewarded with that trust-based relationship over and over and over again. We would like to think that all of us were like that senior partners, that when we see one of our team members being put down, being attacked for whatever it is that they did or who they are, you would hope that each and every single one of us would show up at that moment on their behalf. But can we actually say that? Are we ready to do that? How far will we go to be able to work on people's behalf? And I think that's a key question today. When we talk about trust and building trust, how far will we go? How much are we willing to invest? How much are we willing to risk for the people who have put their trust in us? All right, let's take a look at a few of these other comments that we have here. Let's see. Let's see what Bashir has to say. I think that trust, you have to start by trusting ourselves and forget the previous mistakes and saying the truth every day and everywhere and listen to others more than speaking. There's so much wisdom in that, Bashir. So thank you so much for sharing that. This is not about the past. The past is what it is, but admitting to our mistakes, the things that we have done wrong, and then moving forward with the right action is a key part to building trust. Let's see what else we have here. Jay has another point here about consistency. If any organization only applies it selectively, it induces a climate of mistrust. So some really good points here, Jay, that if you're going to put a rule in place, make sure it's reinforced. Don't put in a rule and then hope that something will be there. In fact, if you have fewer rules consistently applied, you're probably better off than having a huge litany of rules and procedures that are going to be impossible to follow and impossible to reinforce. Matthew, I just like this simple idea. Create linkages, create connections between people. One of my favorite stats comes from a friend of mine who studied relationships and dating, found that when people have something in common, whatever that commonality is, it could be have lived in the same region and cheered for the same team. It could be having the same initials as your spouse or as each other. My husband and I have the same initials, C&L, which is kind of interesting. Even those little connections, those linkages build trust. Again, it builds those connections. So thank you, Matthew, for sharing that best practice. And then I love this point from Vinay. Sometimes rules come in between and stop us from going forward. So that's a really good point. I kind of alluded to it before earlier, Vinay, which is you can have too many rules. And I think most organizations suffer from this. There are so many rules and procedures. It's just gunking up things and slowing things down. And we really wonder, why do we have this rule? Because it feels silly. It's just a procedure to create a job for somebody to say yes to. That's what it feels like. And I agree. I think that you want to have the procedures and the processes and the rules that help move you forward. And the reality is most organizations create rules upon rules upon rules without ever taking any of the old ones away. So one of the best things you can do is to do an audit to say which of these rules are actually moving us forward, building trust, building alignment, making us focus on our customers, on our mission and our strategy, and which rules are getting in the way and holding us back. Because we should get rid of those. Like, why do we have these? I was once working with an executive team. We took all 30 people to an offsite and they were brainstorming exactly these things. What are the things and beliefs and the behaviors that were holding them back? And the CFO came back and said, all of these pricing procedures and requests that we have, getting rid of all of them. I don't need to approve them anymore. And there was this audible gasp coming up from the executive team, like, what do you mean? We've been doing that for decades. You insist on this. And he goes, yeah, but we don't need those procedures because I approve every single one of them. Because who am I to second guess you saying that this pricing change is needed or not? So we'll put the safeguards in place over here, but I don't need to sign off on them anymore. Let's just simplify this process. So there's a few checks and balances, and we'll just get rid of this whole entire process. So Vinay, thank you for bringing that up, because rules and procedures are excellent if they're actually serving a purpose to actually build trust. But if they're not needed, then let's just get rid of them. All right. A couple more thoughts here from Yanti. I love this active listening. I love the way you put it. Quiet moments of hearing and valuing your team members is your way of building trust. The quiet moments of listening. And we're so used to speaking all the time. I love this quote from the Greek philosopher Epictetus, who said, "You were born with two ears and one mouth, use them in the same proportion. Listen twice as much as you speak." And as leaders, we oftentimes think that we need to have the answers, but actually, the listening and the act of listening may be a better way to be doing things. Jacinto has a great point here about how they build trust. Being open and honest promotes shared responsibility. And I'm so intrigued by this idea of shared responsibility, shared accountability, because this is getting a deeper nuance of what does it mean to actually build accountability and responsibility. Again, the openness, knowing where everyone stands, knowing how we are all working together, and me being able to say that this is what I'm personally responsible for. And I'm going to show up and I'm going to deliver because everybody can see me in this open environment. And the honesty that has to come up to say, I'm not going to hit my goal. I'm not going to be there. I'm in trouble. I'm behind. I'm holding everyone back. I need help. That honesty, the openness, the vulnerability that it takes, those are really hard things to do. And if you don't have trust in an organization, that can feel very, very scary because am I going to go out there and say something's not working? Because if I don't trust that my other team members will come to my aid versus they're going to slam the door on me and my head's going to get chopped off, I'm going to be punished for saying that something's not working. What's the reaction? Do I trust that things are going to get better by me being open and honest and transparent about what I'm saying? So that's what I have for today. Again, just to review, I do believe that trust, as you have seen, it is so important in terms of building a disruptive, transformative organization. Because if you don't have trust, you're not going to move fast. You're not going to be open about what's working, what's not. And think about building trust scaffolding, in particular by creating these rules and procedures so that they have that level of accountability that's created and reinforced so that you can then create all these other areas that come from listening, understanding people with each other, the compassion and transparency, and especially the vulnerability and authenticity that is needed to create the relationships. But those can't happen unless you have that environment of that trust scaffolding of these rules being in place, consistently reinforced by you as the leader. I wish you all the best in thinking about how you can build trust, about how trust is actually formed, and how you can create that trust scaffolding again so that you can build tall and high and go fast with all the trust that's needed to create your disruption strategy. All right, so that's what I have for this week. I am so excited for my next stream, which is on Monday, special guest with John Hagel, who is a fantastic leader and thinker. I learn something every single time I talk with them. And he has a new book out called The Journey Beyond Fear. And I'm excited about this because what is the one thing that oftentimes holds us back from moving forward into a disruptive or transformational change is because we're afraid. So how do we journey through fear and use it to accelerate us into that change? And also I'll be back and also on the Tuesday, the June 8th with my regular broadcasts then too as well. So thank you so much for joining today. I wish you all the best and I will talk to you all again soon. Take care.